Hello, this is Jason Hodge, and this is my Formative Assessment Data Review. The data team used to analyze the formative data consisted of just myself for this project. The first thing that was needed was to establish the purpose of collecting the data. As Fisk explains, by not naming a goal, you will never achieve the results you could have. This assessment covers the first half of Unit 7 in Math. In this unit, we teach simplifying, comparing, adding, and subtracting fractions. In giving this assessment, we hope to gain insight on how well the students understand how to add and subtract fractions. Since this is a formative assessment, we also hope to see what misconceptions and misunderstandings the students may have developed. This assessment was given to my 4th grade class. The students worked by themselves to complete the assessment. There was no time limit given to the students. Here's the assessment that was given to the students. The first thing that is needed to do is define what a formative assessment is. As Bernhardt states, formative assessments can either be formal or informal and are used to probe for student understanding so changes can be made to instruction in a timely manner. This assignment was chosen because it relates directly to what was being taught in class. The format of the questions are clearly written. Fisk tells us that too much data or not the correct data will leave us not being able to analyze the trends properly. For this reason, it was imperative to make sure the assessment matched what I was trying to learn from it. Since the assessment is clearly written, it provides data that can be easily acted upon and communicated with both students and parents. Fisk reminds us that the use of charts and graphs is a great way to help staff draw conclusions about the data. For this reason, I used a series of graphs, charts, and tables to make visualizing the data easier. To get a broad look of the data, a pie chart was used to see the overall scores by percentile bands. This breakdown makes it easy to see how well the students have mastered adding and subtracting fractions as a class. For this next graph, we are now able to see individual student scores and compare them with other students in the class. The next step was to then add a table noting each student's score and designation in the class. The designation refers to any academic subgroup in which the student may be a part of. To help get a more in-depth look of the data, I then sorted the scores from highest to lowest. This made visualizing the scores much easier. It also helped bring more organization to the data, which was needed to see how well each subgroup performed. The first subgroup I analyzed was the general education group. From the data shown, this subgroup performed the best as a whole. The next subgroup I analyzed was the gifted group. This subgroup surprised me the most. Where we typically find these students to perform the best, these scores as a whole were lower than the rest of the classes. The next subgroup only consisted of one student. This was the EIP subgroup. The one student in this group receives EIP services for both reading and math. The final subgroup was the English language learner subgroup. The scores in this subgroup were very informative. The 3 students in this subgroup who score the highest speak English well enough to understand what it is that they are being asked to do. However, the 4 students who scored the lowest speak little to no English, which made deciphering directions and making sense of word problems almost impossible. The final table that was used was an item analysis table, where the previous graphs, charts, and tables gave good visuals on student scores. This table provided an in-depth look of how well students did on each question. A green box means a student got that question completely correct. A red box means a student got that question completely wrong. And a yellow box means that student received partial credit for that question. By breaking the assessment down by question, I was able to make well-informed decisions and analyze the data to create an action plan. Information given from this table indicates that students have a good understanding of how to add and subtract fractions based on questions 1, 2, and 3. However, it became apparent that students were struggling with how to simplify fractions based on questions 7 and 8. With a mean score of 71 for all students and an average of 80 when not including the students who do not speak English, I feel the students did very well as a class. The data shows that the students have a general understanding of how to add and subtract fractions with like denominators. This data also showed that the most common mistake was either forgetting or not knowing how to simplify the fraction. Every single student who got partial credit did so because he or she did not simplify the fraction. An issue that comes to mind is the possible lack of fact fluency. One reason for students not simplifying their answers could stem from a lack of understanding of factors and fact fluency. By not knowing their math facts, they would have been unable to simplify the fractions. Another thing that comes to mind is the 4 lowest scores coming from ELL students. This skews the data because it is unknown whether the students miss the questions because they do not understand the mathematical concepts or merely because they do not understand the language in which it is written. I feel there were no glaring direct gaps in instruction and assessment. There are 3 indirect gaps I did note. As stated before, the lack of fact fluency played some role in the students not simplifying their answers. Where this may not be a gap in the instruction being given at the present time, it is definitely a skill that needs to be reviewed with the students. The next indirect gap is the lack of problem-solving ability. For the students who did not get the word problems correct, it was from their lack of being able to reason what the problem was asking them to do. The final indirect gap is the fact that a few students did not speak English. Even though this has nothing to do with the math instruction itself, it does play a critical role in the fact that they cannot understand the instruction they receive. As Fisk proposes, leaders must be able to identify reasons for the negative trends shown by the data. When using the data to promote change, I have to think of possible reasons for the student errors. The next step for instruction is clear. The first thing that needs to be done is decide whether a student should receive remediation or enrichment. There should be more opportunities for students to practice and develop their fact fluency skills. When it comes to word problems, there needs to be explicit instruction in how to problem solve and make sense of the word problems. For the remediation group, a 3-step action plan was created. There needs to be a reteaching of how to simplify fractions. There needs to be a focus on promoting fact fluency. For the students who do not speak English, there needs to be a review of how to represent fractions pictorially. This will also be extended to provide manipulatives to assist in adding and subtracting the fractions. The enrichment group also has 3 identified steps in their action plan. Students will be introduced to adding fractions with unlike denominators. Since students already know what equivalent fractions are and how to find them, this is the next logical step to deepen their knowledge about fractions. These students will also receive more challenging math facts to help strengthen their fact fluency. Since synthesis is the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, a logical enrichment activity would be to have the students create their own word problems involving adding and subtracting fractions. This action plan will be utilized during our remediation and enrichment time. During this time, students will be placed in their appropriate group and will receive the instruction they need based on their formative assessment data. After the action plans have been implemented, the students will be reassessed and the effectiveness of the plans will be evaluated.